Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at a case from 1982 which was finally brought to its conclusion in 2022, over 40 years after it took place. David and Brenda Venables were married on the 1st of June 1960. After their marriage, they moved to Quaking House Farm in Bestman's Lane in Kempsey, Worcestershire. On their 500-acre farm, David, with Brenda's assistance, worked as a pig farmer. It was on this farm that the couple lived, seemingly without incident, for 22 years. By 1982, 48-year-old Brenda had some health problems. She had recently recovered from a severe bout of flu and was also suffering with back and leg pain. Over time, this had taken its toll on her mental health and she had become depressed. On the morning of 4th of May 1982, David awoke at around 6:30 a.m. to find that Brenda had disappeared. That afternoon, David went to the Worcester police station to report that his wife was missing. He informed them that he had searched for her since waking up that day and was becoming increasingly concerned for her safety. As soon as the case was registered with them, the police coordinated a search for Brenda. Initially, this concentrated on the couple's home, car, barns and farmland, but with no trace of Brenda to be found, the search area was soon increased. Waterways were checked, door-to-door inquiries conducted, tracker dogs deployed, and a helicopter was brought in to assist with the search around the River Severn. Brenda's description was circulated to all Midlands police forces, whilst David was reported to be waiting anxiously by the telephone for any news of his wife's whereabouts. He was quoted in the Worcester News as saying that he had been unable to sleep a wink since she left, and I can only hope and pray that she is safe. Brenda's bank account remained untouched, and it was speculated that she may have taken her own life. Some surmised that her body may have been washed away in the River Severn, which was only a short distance from the farmhouse where she had lived. Understandably, Brenda's disappearance was big news within the local area, but as the weeks turned into months, and then years without a single trace of Brenda being found, her disappearance slowly faded from the minds of all but those who were personally involved. Brenda's parents, who were both in their 80s at the time, were devastated by her disappearance and simply did not believe that she would have taken her own life. The negative impact on their life was immeasurable, both in terms of the emotional devastation of not knowing what had happened to their beloved daughter, but also because Brenda was their main carer, regularly visiting them at their home in Bromsgrove, doing their shopping and assisting with their day-to-day lives. Brenda's father, Harold, died 2.5 years after her disappearance, and her mother, Winifred, died in 1996. Neither of them ever found out what had happened to their daughter. Years passed by and the missing person inquiry remained open, but there were no further developments. Brenda's name was added to her parents' gravestone at St Michael's Church in Rushook. It recorded her year of death as 1982. Despite her body never having been found, this at least allowed her remaining family the small comfort of having a place to remember her. For others, life continued to move forward, and in 2014, 32 years after his wife's disappearance, a now 81-year-old David sold his Quaking House farm to his nephew, Andrew Venables, for around £467,000. David moved to a small bungalow approximately a mile from the farm. It would take another 5 years before there was finally a break in the case. In the summer of 2019, Andrew Venables arranged for the septic tank at the farmhouse to be cleaned. During this routine maintenance, workmen discovered human remains within the tank. The police were contacted on the 12th of July 2019, and by the 16th of July, the discovery was being reported in the local press. It was speculated that the human remains may have been linked to the case of 25-year-old Susie Lamplew an estate agent who went missing in July 1986 and who has never been found. However, this theory was soon ruled out, and despite the formal identification process taking several more weeks, a spokesman for the investigating detectives stated that whilst they were still waiting for DNA confirmation, general circumstances lead us to believe that the remains are likely to be Brenda Venables. On the 30th of July 2019, David was arrested in connection with the murder of his wife. He denied any involvement in Brenda's disappearance and was released under investigation. Neighbours who were interviewed said they knew little about David, who always kept to himself and would keep the blinds of his home shut at all times. After a lengthy investigation, hindered by the amount of time which had passed since Brenda's disappearance, on the 8th of June 2021, David Venables was charged with his wife's murder. The head of the Complex Casework Unit, Mr. Mark Paul, said that the decision to authorise the charge against the defendant was made after careful consideration of all the available evidence of this complex case and determining that a prosecution is required in the public interest. David's first court appearance on the 15th of June 2021 lasted just 4 minutes. He spoke only to confirm his name, date of birth, address, and that he understood the proceedings. He was remanded into custody for an additional hearing the next day at Birmingham Crown Court. At this hearing, bail was granted on the condition that he would live and sleep at a nominated address, would not apply for a passport, and would not attempt to contact any prosecution witnesses. 89-year-old David's trial started at Worcester Crown Court on the 13th of June 2022, where he continued to maintain his innocence. The prosecution went on to state that David had known that Brenda would never divorce him, and that he had wanted his wife out of the way so he could pursue his relationship with a lady by the name of Lorraine Stiles. Lorraine and David had met when she was a caregiver for his mother back in 1967, and the pair had had an on-off relationship for more than 14 years. The prosecution claimed that Brenda had been aware of her husband's infidelity, and in 1970 Brenda had confronted Lorraine and informed her that David also had other lovers. The affair had continued during the time of Brenda's disappearance and the subsequent search, but eventually fizzled out late in 1982. Lorraine died in 2017, but a statement which she gave to the police in 1984 described David as quite composed about his wife going missing. During the police interviews, David had downplayed the significance of this affair, stating that it was just a short-term fling. David then went on to say that Fred West could have been responsible for Brenda's disappearance. He said, "A lady rang me up. I vaguely knew her. She said Fred West picked her up in Worcester at a bus stop early one morning, but luckily she managed to escape. I always wondered since then whether he was responsible for picking Brenda up and eventually disposing of her body." When the police asked more about the lady, David could not recall her name. The prosecution also detailed how Brenda had seen a consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Richards, in February 1982, whose notes indicated that she was deeply unhappy in her loveless and sexless marriage. On the other hand, David's defence team argued that it would have been an act of folly for him to place his wife's body in the septic tank at his own house. They also stated that Brenda may have taken her own life without leaving a note. When David took the witness stand, he denied the prosecution's accusations and claimed that he had always adored his wife. He maintained his innocence, suggesting that her remains may have been put in the septic tank shortly before they were discovered. The Crown Prosecution Service refuted the idea that someone removed Brenda Venables' remains from where they had been hidden for years in order to put them in the septic tank outside her home in the days before they were found. They also said that it was inconceivable that Brenda went voluntarily into the septic tank and somehow shifted the heavy lid and put it back in place above her so that there was no signs of any disturbance there. There are also no known records of suicide involving sewage, septic tanks or cesspits. After 5 weeks of trial, the jury took around 17 hours, spread over 4 days, to reach their verdict. With a 10-2 majority, David was found guilty of 1 count of murder on the 15th of July 2022. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. High Court Judge Mrs. Justice Tipples stated that he had shown no remorse for his crime and that he was responsible for many aspects of Brenda's deteriorating mental health prior to her death. During sentencing, Mrs. Justice Tipples stated that, "I'm sure you killed Brenda Venables to remove her from your life and the complications she may have presented to you in any divorce proceedings," adding that he had taken advantage of his wife's depression to create a carefully thought out story that she had left him in the middle of the night to take her own life. His lies led to a police search that cost thousands of pounds and wasted many hours of police time. She also stated that, "Your complete lack of respect for Brenda is obvious from your decision to dispose of her body in the septic tank. The fact that is what you did with her body is disgusting and repulsive." Now aged 89, David was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years. Due to his advanced age, it is very likely that he will only serve a fraction of his sentence and will never walk free again. That concludes today's story. Please add any comments down below, and thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. As today's case was from Worcestershire, I had to mention Worcester sauce. It was invented by 2 chemists back in 1837, Mr. Lee and Mr. Perrins. Have you tried it? Goodbye.